Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. My name's Carla Sorrell. I'm Director of Design Victoria. I'm thrilled that we could all gather here today. Before we start, I'd like to take a moment to remind you that tonight's event and the upcoming events that take place as part of Design Victoria over the weekend take place on the traditional unceded territories of Lekwungen-speaking people. And I'd like to acknowledge that the land's historical relationships with the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanic people have existed since time immemorial. We're grateful to gather here today. And I'm thrilled that we were able to bring this incredible panel to you as part of Design Victoria. The festival is a 4-day festival that celebrates design and the creative sector in Victoria. We opened with a big launch party last night, and over the last day I've had a lot of people asking me, how long has this festival been going on? I started it last year off the side of my desk. When I moved back to Victoria 4 years ago, what I missed about London was all the exciting, fun events that happened across the creative cultural sector, and the parties as well. So my husband and I launched Design Victoria last year. We were thrilled by the uptake we had. So many designers and businesses raised their hands to host an event over the weekend. The success of last year far exceeded our expectations. We had nearly 3,000 people visit the events over the 4 days. This year, the festival is bigger, it's better, and I see many of you have picked up brochures to see what's going on. I think some of you might be encountering the festival for the first time tonight. I just wanted to let you know a little bit about how it works so that you can take in some more of the events over the weekend. So the festival's an umbrella for many independently organized events that take place across the city. And you'll note if you're following us on Instagram or getting my emails on our newsletter or checking out our website that at this point, a lot of those mainly free events are sold out. But I want to encourage you, if you're looking at the festival guide and you're really interested in something, to please come to it. Those are free spots. We anticipate that a certain number of spaces will become available on that day. So I want to encourage you not to be held back by those numbers and to come out to the events that you see and you're interested in over the next few days. I'm just going to finish up by telling you the goal of Design Victoria. The goals are to create opportunities for collaboration in the creative and cultural sector, to raise the public's awareness of the value and the power of design, and to shine a light on all the cool things that are being designed and built in Victoria. So I feel those goals really align with tonight's panel. We're going to talk about collaboration. We're going to talk about what we can do to raise awareness of the power and the value of good design and art. I was thrilled when Franc brought this to me and we were able to plan quite significantly in the future to make this a big part of the festival. So I thank you all for coming. I hope that you enjoy the festival. I'm so excited to hear these panelists and what they have to say. We're really privileged to have this group of people here to share some of the insight into how they work into making and designing the spaces that we inhabit and work in Victoria. So with that, I'll introduce Erica Sangster, the chair for tonight, and she'll give you the panelists.
Thank you, Carla. This is really loud. Can everyone hear us okay? I'm super excited to be here tonight. I'm a local architect. I'm business partners with Franc. And when we started talking about this event, it was really thinking about the conversations that we're fortunate to have on a day-to-day basis when we're working on projects or just thinking about what's possible. And so I'm really excited to open up that conversation to share with everyone tonight. I'm hoping it's going to be a lively discussion. We were kind of joking that this is a test of whether people are true hockey fans or not. If you're here tonight, you are clearly not a true hockey fan, but we'll try to make this evening entertaining for everybody. And I'm hoping that at the end of our discussion, there'll be some really tough questions for the panel. I know that lots of people in this room have as much to say about the topic as we do, so looking forward to your questions when we get to the end. So, as our topic tonight, our kind of premise tonight is that as Victoria continues to densify and urbanize, that arts and culture are increasingly more essential to keeping our city livable and successful. And so we did a bit of research to make sure we were aware of the larger context for our discussion tonight, and looked to the Victoria Arts and Culture Master Plan to see kind of what the city has been putting forward as guidance for public art. And one statement that they have is that the goal is for the city to be a home to creative people and a place that enriches people's lives through everyday artistic experiences. And so I think we're here to talk about how when you want to nurture a creative ecosystem, it's not just a public initiative. It's really important that kind of everyone contributes to that. And with this group that we have here tonight, we're really focusing on what's possible within private initiatives when you make art part of the public space. So I just want to make clear, we're not discrediting true public art. We're just talking about, with this group, mainly the opportunities within private development to contribute to our public art scene. So our conversation tonight will focus on that private sector support of the arts, looking at the synergies between private development and the arts community, and at approaches that we found successfully integrate art into publicly accessible spaces. If I were to go into everything that the people at the front of the room here have done, it would take all evening, so I'm just going to very briefly introduce. To my left here is Robert Jawl. He's Managing Director of Jawl Properties, the Victoria-based developer and commercial property owner. Rob's involvement in Victoria's community runs deep as a current board director for the Royal BC Museum and past positions chairing UDI, as director of the Downtown Victoria Business Association, member of the Mayor's Task Force on Economic Development, and with a background coming from both economics and sustainable urban development, Rob contributes to the health of Victoria through his company's operations, as well as a range of philanthropic initiatives with a focus on youth education and community well-being. Just next to Rob is Bill Porteous. Bill Porteous, I like to tell stories here, but Bill grew up in Southern California, trained at Otis Art Institute in LA, where he formed a foundation not only in conceptual thinking, but also in the physical making of artworks in a wide range of media. Since moving to Victoria in 1974, Bill has contributed to Victoria's arts community as a professional artist, a teacher, a studio and gallery operator, an organizer of and contributor to arts events, and as a member of the Public Art Advisory Committee from, we think it was 1997 to 2011. So I think many people here know Bill. I think many people know everyone across the front here, but I'm going to soldier on here saying what you already know. Next to Bill is Franc D'Ambrosio, principal and founder of the local practice DAU Studio. Frank made his way, I don't know if everyone knows this, but he made his way to the West Coast to come to UBC, and he landed in Victoria in 1989 to work on an Inner Harbour master plan. He soon after co-founded the Urban Design Cooperative with architects Peter DeHoog and Chris Rowe. Not sure if I saw them here tonight. And the really foundational project for that firm was the Selkirk waterfront for Jawl Properties. Starting at Selkirk and continuing into projects across Victoria and the South Island, Frank's work integrates architecture with planning, landscape, and urban design. And just thinking of tonight's topic, he has tirelessly sought out opportunities to collaborate with artists and other creative thinkers. And next to Frank is John Stovell. John is president and CEO of Vancouver-based Reliance Properties. John is a passionate supporter of livable urbanism, heritage, and the arts community. Highlights of this include significant contributions to the Emily Carr College of Art and Design, and John's role with the Vancouver Art Gallery as chair of the board of trustees and developer member on the Capital Expenditure Committee for the Vancouver Art Gallery. Under John's leadership, Reliance has also supported infrastructure for artists, like the Rock Slide Studio and Gallery in Victoria, and the Artist Resource Centre on Vancouver's east side. Currently, John is working with Franc and our team on the Capital Culture District development proposal, which is an initiative that centers on a new downtown home for the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. I could keep going on here, but we have a really brief slideshow here, which we put together really because we'll be touching on some projects as we talk about these subjects, and thought it might be helpful to have a visual image of some of the projects that will be talked about. I haven't figured out how to hold 3 things at one time. So just starting with some of the Reliance projects, and we were hoping the sun would cooperate. I think it has. This is a project on English Bay that Reliance commissioned by Douglas Copeland, and it uses all 4 sides of an entire building as a canvas for a painting. And on an even larger scale, this is a 2-tower project, West Pender, it's this one, which has this dynamic art installation by artist Tamar Franc. And this project, The Wheel of Everyday Life by Gunilla Klingberg, is at the Project 1 Burrard Place, and it is this very striking feature in this plaza, as well as it continues onto the building, forming soffits and with water features that wrap around the plaza and the building. I had the pleasure of visiting that last fall. It's really spectacular. And then moving into Victoria, this is a little bit of a story of kind of the origin of this conversation tonight for many of us standing at the front here. This is the checkerboard at Selkirk Waterfront, and when Bill and Franc met several years ago, there was an arrangement where Bill actually became the artist in residence at Selkirk. And one of the early things that they did is Bill worked with students at the Selkirk Montessori to put artworks into time capsules that are installed under the checkerboard. Still there. And then there was a commission for a really significant painting at the Gatehouse office building. When Franc founded his solo practice, Bill moved in as a neighbor. He was just on the other side of that wall and painted this incredible painting that stretches across the whole back of our studio. So every day, Bill is part of our subconscious thinking. But it was really with the Atrium project that collaboration went to the next level, where the projects were layered and multifaceted, and they went through an evolution, starting with the construction hoarding for the project, which was a painting. And then when the hoarding came down, the paintings were demounted and trimmed and recomposed and installed as permanent artworks. And then even things that could have been just mundane spaces in the building had that personality brought to them with the collaboration with Bill. And I want to mention also with the Atrium building, this is really when Rob became part of the narrative of Bill and Franc working together with Jawl Properties. Address sign, more interesting because Bill was involved. And then the Atrium space itself, where Bill became involved very early to look at just the fundamental space of the project and how to integrate art, not just something that gets added on, but as part of the thinking of that space. So that the floor was a mural. And benches were sculptures. And similar to tonight, it all came together as a space that not only has art embedded into it, but is a space for people to gather and enjoy performing arts, which takes us to our event here tonight.
Great segue.
So to start us off, I was thinking, John, I hope it's okay if I mention this, that that John, when I did a little bit of research, you come from a background where, interestingly, you had studied accounting and you're also in a rock band. And I'm thinking of this as a sort of interesting, an interesting contrast, and takes us to something that comes out of that Victoria Arts and Culture Master Plan, where there was a characterization of Victoria's art scene as punk and polite, which is an interesting, there are a lot of elements to that. And John, I hoped you might start us off by reflecting on that.
Yeah, I was a little shocked to hear that. I would never think of starting an art endeavor with politeness, even in the sentence. Punk, yeah, for sure. I think if we set out to create art that's polite, by intention, we're likely to fail and not produce anything of much interest. It might be polite, but it shouldn't set out to be polite. I think that's likely to not be very engaging if it's proceeding with that kind of caution. And I've said before, I mean, somewhat facetiously, that if you do public art and everybody really likes it, you probably didn't do very good public art.
Anyone have a reaction to that?
Well, it seems like no one likes public art initially. They either like it or love it. And it's one of those things that in promoting and trying to establish public art as a kind of normative thing with city development led us more to say, well, you know what? Let's just do it ourselves. And that's really where it started. It's like saying, you know, we want an artistic involvement in a project. So that came as just a desire, because we thought it would enrich, because the importance of art, I guess, made an impression. But that's how we started.
I think, too, when you overlay specificity around the type of art culture scene that you wish to nurture unintentionally, that has an effect of being exclusionary in some way. And I think when we talk about what a rich artistic culture in this city needs to be founded upon, I think it's a culture of willingness to take risk, a willingness to embrace diversity, and really see a multitude of voices. And yes, sometimes that's going to fall on its face, but I think that's the price of entry if we're going to aspire to a culture that embeds art and its creation and its enjoyment as fundamental to the life that we enjoy.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think the art by nature engages risk, engages unknowns, and focuses more on process as opposed to outcome. And I think that it's reasonable that when people are funding things or investing their resources in a project, of course there is a concern for what will happen. But I believe, I feel very, very privileged to work with people like on my right and left here, because they've allowed me to in a sense, practice my creative involvement in a way that doesn't engage immediately in what's the outcome.
Yeah.
That's giving me amazing creative latitude, and I just like to say that it's unique in my experience, as I've said to Rob a few times, but I wish for artists it's normal. I wish that this, I mean, the whole rationale for me for having this kind of discussion was to share and offer something that I believe has worked, that is inclusive, that includes risk, and includes risk-taking, but in a reasonable way. It's not crazy, it's not off the cuff, but it's rigorous and at the same time demanding creatively.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thinking of the atrium, which has so many layers of collaboration built into it, Rob, when I think back to when we started designing that building, there was so much concern about the atrium being a lifeless space. There were other spaces in the city that hadn't been successful, and so the question was put forward of, you're going to create this this internalized space, but how is it going to succeed? And I'm just curious, Rob, what your reflections are this many years after it's been running on how artwork contributed, it doesn't do it all, but how artwork contributed to the space, the installed artworks, but also how the programming that involves the arts, how that has been part of that.
I think when you're involved in a major project like that has such a significant public component, there is no question there's an obligation from a citizenship perspective to earn the social license to make such a major land use intervention. And in that building, we had this wonderful opportunity in a large public space, indoor and outdoor. But to succeed, we took the view that it needed to be intentionally programmed. It needed to have curated retail in its surroundings. It needed to be finished in a quality that respected the user group. And a huge part of that was making sure that it was enhanced and elevated by the incorporation of artwork. I think that it's proven very successful in part because the users of that space don't really know where the art begins and the architecture ends, or vice versa. You know, Erica showed some of the images, and it's the floor that you're standing on. It's the sculpture that you're sitting on. And I think that represents a deep collaborative effort between Bill and Frank and Greg and the other people that were involved in the design effort to bring that building to life. But it creates this holistic impression that it's a thoughtful, intentional, effortful space. And then the overlay of that is the programming to make that very clear that it's a place for people. It's not the conventional definition of an office building with a burly security guard at the front, you know, who goes there, what's your business? Just the opposite. The incorporation of public art and intentional activation made it clear to the public as a whole, please come in, whether you have anything to do with the building or not, and enjoy it. And I think all of those component parts in a holistic sense, now we're 15 years in of that building's life, and I think continues to fill a really vital community role. And Bill's contributions and the collaboration with Bill throughout that process of realization is integral to that outcome.
John, I wonder if you have some examples of how art has been important to the successful of spaces in your projects?
Well, I mean, it'd be disingenuous for me to say that we did all of those projects that you showed just because we like art. I mean, in Vancouver, there's a public art program that when you do a rezoning, you have to do public art. You have to spend so many dollars per square foot of the size of the project. And we just given our background, we always loved that. We thought that was one of the few things the city makes us do that we actually agreed with. But we had to do it, right? So, but then we kind of got the bug, and we saw how people get delighted and surprised and just discover these things as they're making their way through the city. So now, like the one you showed with the Copeland, there was no requirement to do that. We had a old building that we were refurbishing that was painted kind of, 70s avocado and green, or yellow and green appliance colors, and it stood out, but it was ugly. So we stumbled across this idea of having it done as a mural designed by Copeland, and all these sort of secondary benefits, like it was painted by the mural festival people in Vancouver whose job is to do murals, and so it was yet another way of supporting that community who executed the painting. So now whenever we do a major project, whether we're required to or not, we're going to do public art, and it really is just that. It helps the quality of your project, it makes your project more meaningful and more of a place that people will remember and go to and just discover. So we just find the benefits to be really tangible. Now sometimes it really pisses people off, like the lighting one that you showed. It created a lot of problems. There was people in surrounding buildings, and it was flashing, and it was shining into their bedrooms, and we had to go through a pretty nasty process with the neighbors in the city and kind of come up with a programming that it kind of dimmed and then it turned off at a certain time. So sometimes you kind of you have unintended consequences of it as well.
Well, it's the risk part, right?
Yeah, and that's fine, and you need to be respectful and try and find a way through that. And the city are very supportive. Like, they would rarely say get rid of it. They'll just say let's find a way to to keep people a little happier. So yeah, we just, it's a habit for us now, whether it's required or not.
But it's still a decision. It's still a subjective decision that a development group has to make to say, to allow it to happen, to actually bring the opportunity to light and then inviting collaboration, which is the part that why we say art in public rather than public art, because it wasn't generated by the public. It may have been by public policy, but the fundamental decision of what to create and how to bring that into the process. I mean, you could have just bought something and bought a used Rodin or something and put it in the front.
You could buy like a painting like this big.
Yeah, like that, yeah. Or you could engage local artists or have a competition and widen the net. But that's a conscious choice, and I really have to pinch myself and show some gratitude about being given that latitude, because in the way we work, art is kind of an underlying theme. Everything we do is related, but the result is these things. But the considerations are very similar, except we don't have the freedom of thought, or not say freedom, we have more parameters than fine art. And so by bringing someone in who doesn't think that way, really changes the way we think. And I think it opens doors and it opens potential.
Well, absolutely, and I think I want to put to Bill, like from the other perspective, how is it different for you, Bill, when you're working in a studio on something that's just your work, as opposed to when you enter into a collaborative arrangement with all the parameters as well as all the players?
Well, that to me, it was very interesting when I began collaborations, because often I was met with some skepticism. Can you make something square? And I understand that, but personally, when I'm making a painting, I'm not collaborating with Rob or Frank or John or whoever. I'm with myself and my own thoughts and my own sense of what is right, what's working, what isn't. I decide what scale, my budget. It's amazing. There are a lot of similarities. I don't have a blank check at home. And I was fortunate to grow up in a place and in a school where there was a lot of rigor required in how you arrived at a decision to do something. There's a lot of thought behind it. So when I had the opportunity to work with Frank and Erica and Rob in a project, I was very happy to tell them, what is the budget? Like, what are the limitations? So I think I would say to the artists out there, embrace the limitations. It's amazing what can happen when someone says, we need something for this. So that's one of the things that's different. When I'm making a painting, I have no limits, really. But of course we do. It's almost disingenuous to say, yeah, I just do whatever. No, you don't. So when I have the opportunity and I get to have a dialogue and start a dialogue with Frank and with Rob that resulted in one of the things you see here, to me it's a joy. And it's actually comforting because I can see the limits. So I really say I would embrace that. That's one of the big differences for me.
Absolutely. And maybe Robbie, you could give us some insight into when you're entering into a collaboration like this, what is that kind of risk benefit for you? And there's a lot that has to come together for a development project to be completed and be successful. What motivates you to introduce risk into that process? And
I think for optimal outcome in a public art setting, I've at least seen better examples where projects have moved away from the painting hung on a wall or sculpture plunked down on a plinth that's not predetermined as a fundamental part of the program or an active dialogue with the surrounding architectural resolution. And so in sustainable design, the big theme over the last decade has been integrative design process involving not only architecture, but the multitude of engineering disciplines involved in a project so that they develop understanding and mutual respect for each other's opportunities and constraints and work as a group to resolve those in a manner that's holistically beneficial. I think introducing an artist contribution in that same conversation, again, creates that really important two-way dialogue that allows the artist's thinking and approach to inform the balance of the design team and vice versa. And it creates the stakes for an outcome that is more fundamentally immersive than that, okay, we've got a blank wall with a box on it, put a painting in it. Yes, that involves a lot of trust because you're embarking on a journey and an artistic engagement where you don't know necessarily the end state. But if you have conviction in the process and conviction in the intention of the people involved, I think it serves as the pretext for something really magical to happen and something that is greater than the sum of its component parts.
John, I wonder if you have some reflections on that, or tell us a little bit about how you go about selecting an artist, thinking about how that you're making a commitment to that somewhat of an unknown, or perhaps when you've selected, you've gone internationally to look for artists. So how do you match up what you're looking for with a project?
Yeah, so there's two versions of it. So the public art, mandated public art process, which I think is worth discussing because it means that we all have to do it, and you get more public art that way. But that process is much more formalized, where you create a selection committee made up of the developers. Only one vote on that committee, and you bring in independent third parties, normally artists, a number of artists and art consultants, and then you look at, you study the context, the building, the land, whatever you have, and you come up with 2 or 3, if you can, locations to put things, including on the building. In Vancouver's public art program, you can't put things in the building unless you can show that that's open to the public, which this is an interesting kind of hybrid of. But and then you go out and you there's public art consultants. There's quite a few of them around actually, and they help you select a short list. And yes, you do very often go international. And then you go through a selection process, and you pick one. The other ones get paid, so it's a respectful process. And then you get into the whole budgeting, and another huge part of the risk, not just social risk, is technological risk. If you're using lighting or things that move or things that spray water, you have to really think it through, and then we get to an outcome. And very often we do number of our art installations. Most of them are international artists actually. If we're just doing it ourselves, it's more just what do we know and what do we like, kind of like what Bill was saying, and who do we know from the other ones we've already done, and going through a similar process, but just on our own initiative versus being governed. And I much prefer that. I think it leads to less kind of art by committee outcome, but not everybody does it. A lot of developers, particularly today's economic climate, are going to go scratch that from the budget because they can't afford it or it doesn't make sense. So I actually do like it when it's mandated, but I think the processes could be a little more fluid, and they could trust a bit more in the developer as opposed to having such a kind of committee process.
I think when it's mandated, there are restrictions, there are parameters, but there are also restrictions that don't exist when you have an amenable developer and architect team. And that is to involve the artist in the technological. You mentioned that. And that's what jumped to mind we sit Bill down with our structural engineer when he thinks of hanging something that was never designed to be hung from. And we have to think, yeah, it's a great idea. How do we do it? And that brings him right into the back room of how a building is put together, which is interesting to him, but it's also interesting to us to actually have to explain these parameters and these limitations, because they actually bring out possibilities. And that you know, I'm just watching the slideshow behind, which is a process show you can look at after, that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of images from the process of executing the artwork, which embeds it into the workforce that built it, the craftsmen, the fabricators, the engineers. And it really is a holistic thing. And what they all gather around is, how do we make that artwork? And how do you make artwork that can be made? And it's a fascinating process, makes it way more interesting, and its contribution isn't just the result. It is the process that we go through for that.
Yeah, I think one of the highlights is that the process, the creative process, is not linear. It's more circular or spiraling. I think to arrive at something that is not only going to be attractive, but have some characteristic that makes it more timeless, more available to people across the board, not a certain type of person or in a certain situation. And when you're working collaboratively, to have the ability to try something that doesn't work. I mean, we you know, it's not like, well, here's an idea, let's do it, okay, let's build it. In attempting, I mean, I remember in one project, there's some slides of it, the Emerging Sphere project on 2950? Yeah. It took me, and you can ask Frank, it took me a long time to wrap my head around what that space was actually about. It's a 7-story stairwell. And once I realized that the most interesting part is the void. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but it was so interesting, but to be encouraged by these people to think that way, not like, well, what's your solution? Like, what? Well, it was more like, how's it going? What are you thinking? That time is money, I guess, right? I mean, and that's a real thing. But I think you said it well, Rob, that if you have the ear of your fellow collaborators, if you're actually engaged in a dialogue, things can happen that you can't anticipate in a good way. You take the risk of it going sideways, but more often than not, you get something quite special.
Yeah, I think what we're hearing is that the offset to risk is trust. And just, I open this up to all of you, just how do you get to a point of trust in that process? Maybe, you know, part of what we're talking about tonight is a long lineage of collaborations where it got easier as things went because you already had developed a relationship and some shared language. But how do you start out? How do you jump into that with a new collaborator? Rob, do you want to start us off?
I think you're spot on that the trust now comes easy because there's established relationships. There's a process protocol that's been followed on, you know, a dozen plus projects, and we've been overwhelmingly thrilled with the collaborative outcomes. So that trust exists and will continue to be the source of more shared work. But I think you raise a really key challenge, which is how do you diversify those collaborations, give opportunity to new and emerging artists, different design voices, and plug them into the system and afford them the same freedom and latitude to create that Bill enjoys. And I think that comes back to a willingness to take risk and a willingness to understand that it's not going to be perfect, and if you even try and define it as, you know, success or failure, you're probably missing the fundamental premise of the endeavor. And so I think a willingness to take chances. And by the way, that's a lot of the business that we're in. You know, and no different than when we commit to an architectural resolution or the decision to put a shovel in the ground and pour a bunch of concrete in and try and create one of these buildings. You're taking a risk, and people don't always like what we create, and that's okay. We're going to keep trying, we're going to keep learning from those experiences, and I think you just have to apply that same mentality to art and collaboration and remove that thought that you need a safety net there.
But it's not without conflict. Maybe not in the usual way of arguing, but I think it's because we're punky polite that I have seen Bill walk away from meetings with a quiet kind of, I wish I wasn't doing this look in his face. But he didn't show it, and I guess there's a mutual respect among us that, okay, I'm hearing something I don't like, I don't understand it, or I don't want to understand it, and we've usually kind of come apart, and that's why things have a longer gestation period with us. The building's finished, but the art isn't ready. That never really has come up. It just like, was it right? When everyone around the table went, yeah, that's it. Then the process of making it began. I don't know, how long was this building open before this happened?
3 years.
3 years. So that gestation period is just that, with all the pains and cramps that comes with it. And a lot of frustration, but we know the goal. And now we have increasing faith that the goal will be worth the pain.
I mean, I would add to that the risk offset by trust, offset by experience. Obviously, these are normal techniques in undertaking any endeavor. But I think if you're really committed to public art, you have to also be ready to accept failure. I mean, we've had that lighting installation. I'll come back to that again. It actually, because the artist conceptualized the lights, somebody else made the lights. And this was at the beginning of LED technology, early days. And that installation, which cost about $300,000, I'm sure it'd be 3 times that today, completely 100% failed. The lights filled up with water. They went on the fritz. The whole thing had to be turned off. It was turned off for 4 years. And we finally just got up the kind of gumption to just completely replace it. And the city would have allowed us, like, we made the case that it had failed and we tried, sorry, and they would have let us just decommission it, but we weren't prepared to accept that. We felt that was wrong. So we did it all over again. And we did it first by putting just a test piece of, because that's a 400-foot high lighting array. So we just did a test piece, and we ran it through a couple of winters, and the technology had improved, and then we put it back. So and I'm still doing public art, like somehow I didn't get fired. So, you have to be prepared to kind of accept failure, like in any business endeavor. Sometimes it just doesn't work, and you have to try again.
I think just that whole idea of how to technically make an artwork become physical and real is really fascinating. And I think back a little bit to when I was starting out in architecture and I worked in LA, and the company I worked at had a whole bunch of site supers and craftspeople that had come out of the movie industry. And I think they liked hiring them because these people, they had the skills, but they also had a really creative approach. They were used to just building a wild range of things. So they had a different kind of philosophy when it came to construction. And I'd love to dig in a little bit to, it's been really a joy to see when someone who is a metal fabricator that normally does just like guardrails or something gets to make a sculpture. Bill, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, actually, I just talked to Tom Brotherson, who's an engineer who worked on helicopters. And through another artist friend who's in the audience here, we met Jack Bell, who was local. That was the other thing. That one sculpture project, it really animated a lot of local people, craft people, they're still thrilled about what their involvement was. In fact, he said so. In fact, he told me today that because he did that, he went on to do a piece in Abu Dhabi based on what he had done. Because he was kind of retired, so it was some of it is just circumstance, but the idea that you know. I know as the artist, I make it a point to engage with the fabricators and to educate myself to what's possible. It's one thing to draw something on a piece of paper, but then, you know, it weighs 3 tons. That one of the sculptures started off as a 3-ton block of laminated wood, which took 2 years to cure. So it's quite amazing, but to me, that's one of the joys of the process. I learned so much by being curious about how a fabricator works, what are the limitations, and frankly, why would an artist not do that, have a client, and then find out that they've gone down 6 months worth of work and then realize they can't even make it? So I think it behooves the artists as well to educate themselves and to be aware of, you know, what's doable. That, again, it goes back to embracing the limitations.
One of the things we talked about in organizing this was that it is the kind of extension of a tradition that's really ebbed and flowed throughout history, where, you know, at a certain point, the artist and the architect were a single person working for a patron, and back into Egyptian times. I mean, it's a legacy of creating things by builders of our cities, builders of our buildings. And that's who developers are to me. I never see them as developers, and that word has connotations that I've never agreed with. And I've often said to people, it's developers that actually build the city. They invest the money, time, energy, and muster that community of skills and labor and material that result in the cities we live in. And this initiative is about making art an integral part of that. Simple as that. That's our purpose here. And it's really heartening to see this many people come out and sign up for this seemingly dry subject, we think, to most, but maybe it ain't so dry.
No.
Well, I think this leads me to the next question. I'll start with Rob of, should this be happening more, and do you see, are there barriers that stop developers from taking on this type of challenge?
I think that's a really interesting question insofar as we're convinced fundamentally that this is how we operate from here on out. It'll never not be a part of our corporate DNA or how we think about project conception and execution. And we're excited by that. And that doesn't mean we've figured it out. It just means we're going to continue to learn on this journey where art is a fundamental component of our projects. Informing that is less so the regulatory stick, as we don't have as established a regime in Victoria. It's more informed by a fundamental belief both in the civic responsibility to do good work, and that extends way beyond just art, but certainly it applies to art as well. But I think also when you're involved with a building for the long term, the attributes that make it special, that make it memorable, that make it desirous, that give it a sense of place, those are also things that create value, both economic and social, for all that are engaged with it over its full lifespan. So we're not only convinced that it results in better outcomes for our community, but we're convinced it results in better business outcomes for us. And I think the way that we broaden the array of folks that embrace that in a similar way is simply by talking about that story, really articulating the broad spectrum value to a multitude of stakeholders that embedding art in that process and in that project parameters can create. And, you know, I do somewhat share John's thinking that while I'm glad to have some freedom to operate often in Victoria from an over-regulated art commissioning process, I do think there's a role for regulators to play to ensure that certain floors are met. Because as we mature as a city, as we mature as a cultural community, I don't think it's unreasonable when you have large-scale land use interventions occurring that art be placed as a prominent component of that. And whether that's articulated as minimum spend, or whether that's articulated as component part, or whether there's overlay of procurement methodology. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to debate how that's best done. But I hate the thought that somebody today could be doing major project work and it be totally at their discretion if they're not a well-intentioned actor.
Yeah, I would add that you know, I think, of course, I think it's obvious that we're of that faith that we should be doing that, and we'll continue to do that corporately. But go back to the Vancouver Public Art Program again. It's quite interesting. There's a policy there where if you do the public art on the site, you're going to spend the full budget. But if you want to just give the city money to do public art somewhere else in the public, you only have to pay 70%. So you can save 30% of the money going out of your pocket and just write them a check and not have to worry about it, no headaches, and it's 30% less. Almost nobody does that. So the grudging, unwillingness to sort of do it is not as real. There's kind of a nascent willingness to do it, because when it is a requirement, nobody takes the 30% discount, because they logically conclude that, okay, maybe it'll help my project. I'll spend 30% more, but at least it won't just be somewhere else. It'll be my project and my art. And so I think that's proof that there's kind of there's a willingness there to do it. Yeah.
Well, maybe just to follow up on that of John, with your experience in Vancouver, when you come, I know you spend a lot of time here as well, but what's something that you see is maybe missing from the Victoria arts and culture scene, something that you think you've seen successful somewhere else that would succeed here?
It's almost the opposite, I have to say. And one of the things I really like about Victoria is that it punches way above its weight in arts and culture. It's something to do with, the demographics. It's something to do with the cost of living equation that's still in effect here, barely, compared to Vancouver, where in Vancouver, like, once you've paid for your crib, you got a little bit of money left, and in art in Vancouver, that usually is going into activities. It's a real heavy activity city, skiing and all these different sports. And I think in Victoria, there's still room in the kind of budget, people's budget to spend money and participate in arts and culture. And so it's one of the things that I think Victoria is actually better than Vancouver. I mean, obviously there's large-scale culture and things there but the culture at the community level is way stronger in Victoria. So to me, I see the opportunity of how to tie into that, how to, like, what's happened at the Rock Slide Gallery is ridiculous. I mean, they have 80 artist studios in there now, just by giving them a little bit of an economic opportunity and they're investing in the building and spending money and doing all sorts of great stuff there. So I think the opportunity that we see is how, not just to create art in the public realm, but how to do it in conjunction with helping to support and grow the arts community. So I think I'd rather be doing public art here than in Vancouver, frankly.
I think we're getting close to our time, so maybe we'll just work our way across the front here of other reflections on something that you think could be added to Victoria, or something that is a favorite piece of artwork or arts and culture experience. Frank, you want to pick up on that?
Well, there's a lot going on in that regard. A lot of the times in Victoria, what bubbles to the surface is the historic angle and the idea that preservation of architecture and art and the urban fabric tends to get attention and priority. We're watching occur, and part of the Design Victoria weekend is an exhibition at the Wentworth Villa Architectural Heritage Museum, which I'll bet half of the people in this room didn't know existed. But it's an interesting place where you can go and learn about the art and architecture of our city up to a point. And right now there's an exhibition on and discussions, I'm not sure when it is, tonight or tomorrow night, not sure. It's 10:30 tomorrow, thank you, to talk about Centennial Square. And Centennial Square is an interesting issue because it is a major public space that was a modernist intervention in a national historic site, which is Old Town, at a time when modernization or urban renewal or progress was not frowned upon when it replaced neo-Victorian heritage. So that space was created, and as part of that space, a significant artwork was commissioned and gifted to the city of Victoria by the surrounding municipalities. That is now the subject of debate on whether it should be restored, retained, moved, removed, modified, and so on. And so the attitude towards the art that gets created through initiatives like this comes to light. What is going to happen to this when we're all gone? Will the value of it be maintained for its own sake? And that to me is very interesting. And I work in a contemporary architecture firm, but we're working in a built fabric that, you know, it's as old as we get. It's not that intimidating because it's not that old. But with artistic intervention that is everywhere of a certain period, I find it gets much less respect than a kind of pedestrian older building. Whereas an artwork, I believe, has a timelessness to it because when it wasn't created for mercantile purposes or anything. And I find that interesting. So the debate around Centennial Square is one I'd look at, looking for its resolution.
Bill?
Well, I think from my, from an artist perspective, I would like to see more opportunities for artists who are emerging, young artists. I mean, it gets down to the economics. I think I've had this conversation with Frank and I think John recently that if you look at it, what does an artist need to thrive? Not just to survive, but to thrive and flourish. And studio space, a living wage so that they can work all day and then do their art all night. And also a system or a structure that welcomes them, that embraces the risk that they're taking to invest in their own discipline. And I think it's interesting that if there was a link, if the city or if the powers that be have people involved in the interface with artists who are of that mind, who don't see it as a bureaucratic effort, but as an artistic effort, like we're talking about, where there's a collaboration, where they invite dialogue with artists. And I think as an artist, I feel a responsibility to try to mentor or help artists who don't have the situation I've encountered. And I think that's something we need more of. I think there needs to be an attempt or some way of engaging in an ongoing dialogue, not just when we have events like this or not when there's a show, but as a normal course of how we all communicate with each other. I would love art to be normal. I would like it to be just,
polite.
We need a plumber. I never mentioned polite, but if that's what you'd like, now I might make a proposal to you with something, maybe, maybe a blow-up balloon. Well, sorry, Coons had done that. So, but to be honest, I think that by nature, art is risky. That's what creates the controversy, or the it keeps people from engaging with sometimes. But there's a lot more to it than just that. I think making art to try to be, controversial is just to me as off-putting as trying to make art that's polite. So, but I'm not of a political ilk, but I think the nature of it, again, speaks to the root of how do we want to be together in this city. And I think it takes a bit of audacity to practice art, but I think those questions are worth asking. What kind of city do you want? And if you want art, but
I think I understand why you were such an adamant supporter and proponent of an art policy for Victoria that could be enforced, because it would spark that, at least the discussion, and bring everybody into that tent.
Yeah.
And say, okay, you're a developer, you're developing architecture or whatever it is, you must in some way contribute to the artistic community by engaging an artist.
Well, again, I think if you have a policy, it has to have what I would call teeth. It has to have, you have to mean what you say. So the art policy cannot be political. And I think it's unfair to hand it over to a bureaucrat who has little training, if any, in art to make huge decisions.
But how do they handle that in Vancouver?
Well, they have these committees, right, that have made it.
There we go.
It's where all government endeavor starts and ends. But there are no bureaucrats other than the committee makes their presentation to the public, to a public art committee that has your endeavor committee makes a recommendation to this global committee, who's really just sort of checking for kind of outward parameters. So it's not too bad.
But what about the relationship? See, I'm torn about whether to have. I kind of gave up on it. I served 4 years on the advisory of the city, and maybe that process has been frustrated here because there is very, very little scope in trying to make it work other than a committee.
Well, I don't think I think they should just be $1 per square foot that like on a rezoning, when you're going over and above what's otherwise permitted. There should be $1 per square foot, and at the end of the day, they should just come and make sure that the public art's there. Like, they shouldn't have any other involvement than that, because as Bill says, it becomes politicized. It starts to get torqued and adjusted for whatever the current political issues are, and it just becomes, a lot of it's called plop art. Like, it's just, something just gets dropped there, and it doesn't defend anybody. So I don't think the city should have any judicial role in it other than to make sure you spend the money.
I think that comes out of relationships. And, in preparing for this, I kind of looked back in history, and every single piece of art and architecture that has become timeless or been documented and is adored or reviled worldwide came from relationships. And how can you form that relationship when you have a monetary, contractual, financial obligation?
So we don't have to pay the artists then? Is that what you're saying?
No, not with the artists. I'm talking about
Well, you're not paying the city. You're paying
the political side of that. I think a patron should have the opportunity and the right to, even through a mediator like the architect, engage with an artist or numbers of artists and let relationships develop that then result in the collaboration. I think that's something that I don't know can happen other than the funding of it with an art policy. I used to think maybe it could, but
I think, and I'd love to hear Rob on this, but one of the things that struck me when I was on the Arts Committee was the fact that the political body that literally decided to do what we suggested, because the Public Arts Advisory Committee advised, they don't make decisions. But I think for many, many years, I suggested we have a conversation with the councillors, with the mayor, and sit down respectfully and say, this is your policy, this is our policy, this is how we arrive at these decisions. So it's not a mystery. The cards are on the table. And I think unless you have that kind of dialogue, I think, again, how can I expect someone who is involved with making sure they have enough votes to get voted? And I understand that, and that's why they're doing it. But when you're involved with the public good, to me it's important that what we mean by public, not what I like or you like, but the public, there has to be some engagement with the idea of the public good, just like you mentioned citizenship. So there's got to be a larger conversation. It can't be, oh, I don't like, oh, what, that's going to be controversial. That's pretty low level. So that's what I would encourage, is make it normal. Every councillor, if we have a policy, should know what the policy is. They should be part of it. You know, I would welcome that as an artist.
I was hoping we would say things that would spark some reaction from the audience, and I suspect this has happened in the last 5 minutes. But before we open up to questions, Rob, were there any reflections you wanted to wrap up with?
Just that when you reflect on the buildings that get built, the policies that get enacted, the politics that govern our lives, ultimately at core, they're a reflection of the prevailing culture of the time. And I think if we go ultimately upstream and we want to change the way art lands in our community, it's about nudging the culture in a progressive direction. And a big part of that is what we feel deserving of and worthy of as a citizenship. So I remember when we finished the atrium in 2010, and it was a progressive building for downtown. It was large and it got a lot of attention. And one of the things that was said to me repeatedly was, wow, I come in here and I feel like I'm in Toronto or Vancouver or London. And it was intended in all cases as a compliment to Bill's work and Frank and the balance of the team's efforts in pulling off a project like that. But I thought it was actually quite a sad reflection. And it was at core somewhat suggestive that people in those great cities are worthy of great design and intentional effort and artwork embedded in their day-to-day lives. And that in Victoria, we're not quite there yet. We're not quite worthy of that. And I think the way in which we're going to level up what we get is when we, as a collective, level up our expectation, because that's upstream of what then informs policy and politics and decision-making and the actions taken by people involved in the creating and execution and facilitation of artwork at all touch points. And so that's my hope. And I think that the seeds for that in Victoria, I mean, as John mentioned before, there is such a huge artistic community here. There are talented fabricators. I think there is all the pretext conditions to support a cultural push. I don't want to say shift or evolution. We're already going in a good direction, but just give a little more nudge to that. And I think ultimately it needs to be pulled along by community expectation.
I'm really hoping there will be some tough questions coming, and we'll maybe try without the microphone. We can send a microphone back, or we could see if we can hear you okay. Maybe starting back. Hold on, Ilarion, 1 sec.
No, we're going to need a mic.
Okay.
Graham, can you take mics around?
Hi. Oh, God. So this is going to be a funny question because it's about sound. And I was really aware of the acoustics while we've been in here. And I just wondered if sound is a consideration when you're building things, and if you consider it part of art, the component of art. Oh.
Yes, the acoustic part of our buildings is one of the many considerations. But the program for space, especially spaces that are incidental and they're built largely for other purposes, the fact that they become venues for events like this or for performance is something that we kind of discovered with the atrium. We kind of knew that it might be used for that. So we did put acoustic treatment. There's acoustic treatment in this building, but it wasn't designed for voice. Right? I don't know if you can hear me now at all. So it has to be amplified, but then it also has a lot of hard surfaces for the other purposes this building has. So it's something that we do consider. It is built into the point of the program, but how buildings get used sometimes is quite surprising. Like the atrium, we kind of knew some of the things, but we had no idea that it would be embraced as a performance space, really, or a social space, the way it has. So I think it's something that, but you can adjust things like that. So if this continues to be used for large audiences, you know, there's stuff we can do.
Do you need a microphone?
Yes, I do. I don't think he does.
Thank you. You can all hear me? So this is my question. Can I rant a little bit and just talk as opposed to answering a question? Yes? Can I? I'm looking at you. Okay. So my name is Valerian. I'm a public artist in town, amongst other things. And I really appreciated everything that you had to say. And I have to say that I do know Frank to some extent, and I know Bill. And how can I say this? You guys are dreamy. You have a dreamy relationship with Rob. And it's great because you guys talk, and I respect you as designers, but I really, really respect you as intellectuals. And can you guys ever talk and share ideas? And I suspect they do that with Rob, and Rob sends it your way. And that is, that's pretty rare in the public art world. My world is, I enter competitions, and who do I talk to? Moi. I look at a picture, I talk to myself, and you know, I get pictures of the site, I get, you know, there's writing, there's the discourse. That's my relationship with the work. And isn't it wonderful that you gentlemen get to talk? So you go through this, you submit your work. First of all, you submit your credentials, see if you get shortlisted. You produce an idea, and then if you're still fortunate, you get, you know, you go to the next stage, and you get down to the last three. And it's like you're on your own the whole time. There's just not a relationship. You go to the site, that's a relationship. So the fact that you gentlemen, ladies get to chat, that just means so much because it grows. So, you know, I'll do these sculptures and I'll do these monsters, and I'll have the relationship with the fabricator, and the people who are fabricators, they're gods and goddesses. Can they listen? Can they ever? And they have an amazing skill, and they transform your ideas into this three-dimensional form that's safe and is durable and all that sort of stuff. And that becomes part of the discussion. But with the owner, it's, you know, you make the thing, and that's been my experience in doing this work, is my relationship with the owner is right at the very end when you've done this. So that's great, thank you, and you get paid and you have a discussion about it. But what I'm watching you are talking about is just so much healthier, because I really think that you get a soul to the work, and the process that I'm in, it's a little bit soulless, you know, and I find it kind of tough. So anyway, that's my rant. I really, really appreciate everything you guys talked about. I agree with most of what you said. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Hi. Am I too close to the amp? I think maybe. My name is Elena Lindgren. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Fine Arts at UVic, and so I know many young artists, if you're interested, and the energy there, is very much like the energy here tonight. But I'm wondering if you've thought about expanding the definition of art and artists. Your buildings are artworks, and it makes sense to have visual artists very much involved, but space and design is very important to all of the arts, and I'm wondering, what it might happen if you brought a choreographer into the design process, not to create a space where people would dance, but that a choreographer's sense of space and design might be stimulating. And I know that artists potentially, or some artists would be very stimulated in return and creatively, and so I'm wondering if as part of the process you would ever consider, what would happen architecturally if you talked to, a composer, a musician, or a choreographer, or, a number of different kinds of artists.
We've actually done that. So the atrium, while it was being constructed, I was not successful in introducing or getting approved a proposal by a composer colleague for a music that would be played with the materials that were being used in the construction, that would then become a white noise soundtrack. At the time, we were discussing acoustics, and we were foreseeing a problem with a volume that big, with that much glass, with a glass roof and a stone floor, that it would be problematic for the reverb time. So our acoustic engineer, and we discussed it, and we met with Tobin Stokes. I don't know if you know who he is. And we talked about it, and he made a sample piece that I still have a cassette recording of, but it was, I think, a little too esoteric for our patron at the time. But it
never gives up.
Who was that?
We're on such a high note.
Yeah. I know. We've been supporters of Dance Victoria for many years, and they've used the atrium as an expressive dance venue. We've had choirs.
We've had multitude of artistic disciplines used as a venue, but I totally take what you're saying, which is just diversity of artistic lens at the informative stage to cause us to think differently about the problem we're engaging with and how we might solve that. And I think core to what we've been talking about today is how the projects that John and myself and the team up here have been involved in have been enhanced by facilitating artist and architect collaboration from a very first principles level. And there's no reason that dialogue need be limited to folks engaged in, the physical arts, right? It could be dance, it could be music, it could be so many other avenues of the art community with a similar diversity of lens and opinion that would inform the work in an enhancing way. So I think
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I am much involved with the City of Victoria on a public engagement process. Right now, the city does not have a public arts committee. when I have asked the city why not, they say people did not volunteer to serve on it. And when they did, they didn't show up for a quorum. So we would have public arts come before the city. There was no committee, therefore council did not even consider it. So we are interested in the arts. We should be approaching the city and have them reestablish the Public Arts Committee. And at the same time, Bill gave a very good suggestion. We should ask for a policy change in that council has to engage with the Arts Committee on a more, I will say, intimate basis, rather than just having a recommendation sent to them. So who's going to volunteer?
Do any of you want to answer that first? Okay, I'm JC Scott, and I was a mural painter in Vancouver a long time ago, and we helped create the public art policy there. I agree with everything that's been said here tonight, and the most important thing for me is what Bill said, which is that what we really will have to use to make this work, to have a neo-Renaissance here in Victoria, is to just make art normal. I therefore laud Robert and John for being leaders in something that the city has dropped the ball on. I was co-chair with Bill of the Public Art Committee. We have our frustrations between arts and politics. Let's just drop it. Let's just let these leaders, let the citizens and the normalcy, the 30,000 people who go to Moss Street, the similar numbers who attend Symphony Splash. We are the strength of the arts in Victoria as the public. And if the developers benefit better through the arts, let's just support that. Let's make art normal in architecture.
Hi, my name is Emily. I guess it was a follow-up question like these gentlemen's. I wanted to pick up on this distinction that I think you made, Frank, earlier about art in the public versus public art, and how can we work more closely with the public, with local communities in the process, from selecting an artist through commissioning, through to being involved in the fabrication of a public artwork. How can the public, how can the city help reach the public?
Sometimes I feel like a midwife between our clients for buildings and artwork. And oftentimes that involves a community association and the people that live in the area. We did a project with Ilarion years ago where part of the community amenity contribution was to conduct an art project and to create a work that would be displayed in public on private property. And Ilarion's idea was to institute a cleanup of a moribund creek adjacent to our site that used to run through what was our site, and commemorate it by taking the roof water from the building and creating a fountain, and have school children collect the debris from the creek, and he cast it in aluminum, and it became the sculpture in these ponds that celebrated the return of spawning salmon. And that sculpture exists at 1990 4th Street, the corner Foul Bay and 4th Street. So we worked with the community association, with the schools. We also provided water, because the theme was water, to a community garden as part of a CAC for a project. So it kind of bridged art, social enterprise, and kind of community contribution. So it can be done, but it has to be orchestrated. So time and energy on the part of usually the architect of a building is what brings all those people together. We're like midwives.
I'd just like to build on that a little bit, Frank, that imagine if everyone was thinking about how they could encourage or get involved with as art, seeing art as an integral part of the community fabric. If every person used their mind or their consciousness to be aware of that, you know what? Where's there an opportunity to do something, to either contribute something that would enrich the cityscape or the landscape or a wall somewhere? I mean, I think it has to be, like we said, normalized, but also there has to be some energy behind it. There has to be, you have to lean into it. I'm a big believer in don't wait. If you want to do something, do it. You know, find a way to marshal your resources or engage other people who have a like interest. So I think you can't be passive about it. And I think that there's a big difference between I would like to do it or I want to do it. If you want to do it, then that's great. That's a start. But you can't wait. You can't react. I think you have to initiate. And that's what's wonderful about the people I'm associated with, Rob and John and Erica. They're not waiting. They're actually initiating the conversation. To me, that's telling, right? That I always see I always see it as an opportunity for me. I don't think, oh, good, it's an opportunity to contribute something. Not get something, but to contribute. Of course that you get something, but it's really because it's an opportunity to actually act on what you believe is valuable and what you believe is enriching and nurturing. That's pretty amazing that we get to do that if you decide to.
First of all, thank you very much for this incredibly inspirational panel. It has been, I think, 6 years that I have been to Victoria. This is one of the best 2 days that I have had. And because design, art, this kind of things feed our souls. So I have been fed last 2 days, thank you very much. And I do believe that learning art should start in the very early ages. And individuals like Carla and Will, they have started a wonderful movement. And I mean, I'm impressed with the harmony here too. It is a value, and as a designer, this is a very challenging process. It is so difficult to find developers who respect art, first of all, because it is a budget. So I think learning everything from the early ages is very important. Maybe city can start some movements like this. In Europe, for example, Venice Biennale is somewhere that we want to go, and I really want to take my kids there, and why not we should have something like that in Victoria. Because we are so close to Seattle, it is a new Silicon Valley, the money goes there. Unfortunately, art needs money too. And yeah, I mean, Victoria is a nature-wise an amazing city. I'm really impressed, but we need more art. This is my observation as a third eye maybe. I am so impressed with the harmony here, and thank you very much creating an art piece here. Thank you.
My name is Tanya Lucente. I'm a lighting consultant and designer. When you're doing construction on buildings and the art is a part of the building, is the illumination of the artwork part of the art budget, or does that come out of the electrical?
In the example we showed there of the very large lighting installation, that was purely the public art budget. In fact, we had to demonstrate to the city that that lighting wasn't serving any other purpose for which we would have otherwise had to provide lighting. It was purely decorative, and you know, we agreed with that. So there's other examples, I think, of when Frank was talking about heritage buildings, and there's some in Victoria where the lighting is still decorative, but what it does is it illuminates the heritage structure and the depth of the window frames and all that stuff. So that's kind of an example where, you know, not obviously art-based lighting actually enhances the architecture, which is some consider to be the art that's being preserved. So there's kind of a whole range of nuances there, but whenever we've done lighting, it's been superficial, meaning it was added for the art purpose, not to have the performance of the building.
So does that come under the art budget?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We did a project some years ago. We were commissioned to, with electrical engineers, design the lighting of the Belmont building, which belongs to Jawl Properties. And we actually did tests and field tests and designed where the lights should go, what intensity. And we were brought in because it had to illuminate and show off the architecture of that building, the details and all that. So that is in the realm of what we like to do too. And I think it's considered art, and it is celebrating architecture. So yeah. Well, yeah, you have to have the budget for everything. It's how you choose to spend it.
Any last questions? I'd really like to thank everyone for coming tonight and thank our panels for this conversation. Thanks for letting us share the conversation with you.